Good morning, everyone. My name's David Stewart. I work for a company called Critical Blue. I'll talk a little bit later about what we actually do. So what we're going to talk about today, and it's a great pleasure to be back here again. This year's topic is API abuse. API abuse is unauthorized use of your API by persons who shouldn't be using it, or in ways they shouldn't be using it, or use of a third-party API by somebody who shouldn't be using it, using perhaps your credentials. So these are the two scenarios that we're going to talk about today. So this is a security presentation, so it has to start with all kinds of scary stuff that you probably already know about. But actually, if you've seen me present before, I don't do this. So we're not doing this. So I like to try to present security in a much more positive way. So it's a good thing that you should do, and it will help you grow your business, protect your business, and so on. So I'm not going to tell you lots of scary stories about how it can all go wrong, because you already know that stuff. Let's be positive and see, how we can manage things. Now, API abuse. Gartner's not right about everything, but this is their opinion about how important API abuse is. It's a real thing. So, show of hands, who believes that API abuse is a real thing or has experienced it in their business? Excellent. So, you are in this category here of the stressed person who's worrying about who's going to abuse their API next and what you're going to do about it. The rest of you who haven't experienced it yet are like this guy. So you're oblivious, you've no idea what's going on, you're very happy, you've got your API out there, you're all going to get rich, it's going to be great. So if you're feeling like that, then maybe you need to think about it a bit more. Now let's just talk a little bit more detail about API abuse. Obviously, when you put APIs out there, they may have security vulnerabilities in them. They may have, let's call them undesired features, which under certain circumstances could cause your API to start leaking out stuff that it shouldn't. That's not what we're talking about. We're actually talking about the perfect API that has no vulnerabilities, if it exists, but people using it in the correct way, but they're not using it, they shouldn't be using it in the way they're using it, or they are pretending to be you and using a third-party API. So that's specifically what we're talking about. Now, APIs are, in case you hadn't realized it, a great big, huge glass window into your business. So somebody looking at your API, looking at the traffic, looking at the protocols that are being used, can see everything about how your business works. And that's the way you should think about it. That is how transparent it is. And it's all a question of what you're going to do about that. So, coming into a bit more detail about APIs and how they all work, I'm using a fintech example. Obviously, there's lots of different kinds of APIs that communicate between different things. We obviously have machine-to-machine APIs. We have websites to back-end servers. We have mobile devices to back-end servers, and all sorts of combinations of these. Now, when it's machine-to-machine or server-to-server, there are actually some quite secure ways in which you can control, make sure that people can't access this. The point I want to make through this, and I'm using, as I say, fintech as an example, is at the end, when it comes to the consumer, the actual end customer, probably there's going to be a mobile app. Probably. There might be a website too, but there's probably a mobile app. And that's actually the one, in our estimation, that's the one that you really want to worry about, specifically because that endpoint is untrustworthy in the extreme. Not only is it untrustworthy, but it's an environment where somebody can spend as many hours and days and weeks and months as they would like to unravel your API that attaches to the mobile app, or indeed unravel the mobile app itself. So that's the one. It's also the one that has the least historical, if you like, solutions for protecting it. So I'm going to focus more on that, and I'm going to give you examples of things that have really happened and what we've seen, and I'm going to talk about what we do and why it is that we actually know a bit about this. So Of course, people want to use mobile devices or tablets, mobile, footprint device. That's the most convenient thing for them to use. It's what they would desire to use if they were given the choice. It's not just, of course, end consumers. You also may have internal mobile apps which are used by employees, colleagues, etc. So there's a lot of different mobile apps out there which can be used for many different purposes. Some statistics here that are actually quite interesting. 10 or more mobile apps in the vast majority of corporations, which is sometimes a surprise to some people. But the second one, about the number of SDKs and the fact that each SDK has usually at least one API. So we tend to think about this picture of the mobile app, the single API that goes into the backend server, and that's what it looks like, but it doesn't look like that at all. That's the one that you control, but actually you may have put third-party SDKs in there, which will then, propagate out to third-party APIs or have their own APIs. You may have chosen to use some third-party APIs. I'm going to give an example of that in a moment. So there's a lot of connectivity here that you need to think through. I won't even ask if there's anybody here from Twitter, but I'm just using this as an example. This is not, I'm not picking on them for any particular reason. So the point of this is, you sign up, you decide that you're doing your mobile app, you want to actually have, use the Twitter API within your mobile app. So you go along and you sign up and they give you an API key. That's how it works. And you present that API key each time you want to access the API from your app. Now that's all fine so far. The problem is, and particularly as the API community matures and people are now starting to charge for API usage. It was all free to begin with. Everything's happy. Everybody's free. Everything's great. Everything's free. Then, of course, as things mature, charges start to be introduced. So they give you an API key, and they tell you that you should not hard code it in source code. That's excellent advice. What they don't tell you is what you should do with it. So if you have a mobile app, and the mobile app has to present this API key to the API to access it, well, what are you supposed to do with it? So most people put it in the app, which is actually a bad thing to do. But the point is, it's not easy to see what alternatives there are to doing that. So API keys are a great way to identify a user, but it's an extremely insecure way to do pretty much anything. So I just want to pick up one slide on what we do. So we are a mobile app authentication solution. So basically what we do, if you think about that example I just gave of API keys, the thing that would be nice to do in addition to presenting the API key would be to validate that that API traffic actually came from the mobile app. Because the risk is, and a classic example of API abuse, is you lift the API key, which is a static secret, can be used as much as you like. You stick it in a script, and then you carry on using, accessing whatever backend services the API key allows, and nobody's any the wiser that it's actually going on. Sometimes you are aware that it's going on, but that's because somebody's been really stupid and they're actually using the API at very high frequency. So you think you're being, or there's. It looks like there's a DDoS attack or somebody's using it too quickly, etc. But most people who are using API keys when they shouldn't be are smarter than that, and they just keep the frequency down so you don't even know what's going on. If they're using your third-party key, then what will happen is you'll get a bill you didn't expect, and then you'll have to go through the process of arguing with Twitter or whoever it is to say, no, I didn't make all these transactions. You really don't want to get involved in all of that stuff. So a nice way to protect the API key is to make sure that the traffic itself came from the mobile app that you think it came from. So think about it in addition to, we're all familiar with user authentication, think about this as mobile app authentication. So a mechanism that does not require any secrets to be stored in the app, therefore is a very secure way of authenticating. And I'm not going to go into the detail of how it works, but I'd be happy to talk to you about that later on if you're interested. So let's go into some examples of API abuse. Now let's talk about the sort of people who do the API abusing. Well, of course, one of them is going to be this guy, because he appears in all security presentations as well in one form or other. And he or in fact she, is in fact guilty of API abuse. This is an example. This is actually one of our public case study examples. Racing Post is a media/betting company in the UK. It's quite an interesting one in the sense that betting, at least until recently, with Google Play, betting apps were not allowed into the App Store. So if you wanted to use Racing Post's betting app, you had to sideload it onto your phone. But the bad guys, the guy in the hoodie that was there, what he had thought about before was, I'm going to put an app into the App Store because people will download that thinking it's the Racing Post app. So they had all kinds of problems with cloned apps and people using them and entering credentials, etc. So it was a great way for the bad guys to actually collect credentials. But what was the point? What were they actually doing? So what they were doing, the value that Racing Post as a company brings is they have lots of historical data. So they are a real data house. And if you're doing betting, they provide lots and lots of interesting information about historical performance of primarily horses and dogs. With that information, in theory, you can make more intelligent decisions about where to place your bets. The interesting, though, thing for Racing Post is that their revenue comes from getting a cut of the bets that are placed. So if the valuable data that they have goes somewhere else and is available somewhere else for somebody to use, those people will place bets through other channels, which means Racing Post revenue goes from wherever it is to zero. So this is very much a kind of binary situation. So what happens here is they put out a cloned app. Some people download it. Some people will use it. They will enter credentials. They can be gathered. They will also reverse engineer the API requests. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, they're going to create, a script which basically uses those credentials and is able then to go to the back end and extract all the information that they need. They will then throw that into a spreadsheet and do whatever analysis they do. So this will all be automated, so they can basically pull out all the information they need using the API that they've reverse engineered, using the credentials that they've collected, and put it nicely into a spreadsheet that will tell them exactly where to place their bets, and actually they can place the bets automatically as well. So it's a money-making machine. So it makes money for the guy in the hoodie, but it also obviously really has a big impact on Racing Post's revenue. We could see this actually because when they implemented the approved solution on the case studies there, if you want to look at it in more detail, they not only found that 10 to 15% of their traffic was not coming from the app, so it was being connected to by various scripts and bots and who knows what was being done with it. They basically killed all that traffic not coming from the app, and their revenue went up because when people wanted that data, they actually had to come and use their proper app, and therefore it was just convenient for them to place bets locally, so actually they were able to see an improvement, an increase in revenue. So that's the typical example of an API abuser. You think, well, that's the kind of person, it's organized crime or it's bad guys. Well, let's look at some other people who also do API abusing. This nice lady here, she wouldn't do anything like that, would she? Well, maybe she would. So this is gaming. So this mobile gaming. And again, example that we've seen. And here you're using scripting mechanisms to play games automatically. And the reason that you would do that, well, there's a couple of different things going on in this slide. One, let's take the fake account creation first of all. Let's assume that your mobile game has a sign-on benefit. So if you sign on, when you sign on for you sign up as a new user on a game, you get some reward as a result of being a new user. Well, that's a perfect reason to create lots of fake accounts, get together all those rewards, amalgamate them all together, and then use that for getting access to, moving up the table, or getting access to being able to trade in those rewards for things in the game. Or you simply build an application that plays the game while you're asleep. So there are many games that if you play it a lot and you keep playing it, then you will gain points and move up to the next level. And obviously, as you can avoid having to do in-app purchases, which is, for mobile gaming these days, is where most of the revenue comes from. And you can do that by simply running these scripts. And it's not fair to other game players. But think about it. The person who's doing this is entering their user credentials. So checking user credentials is not going to help you at all, because they're actually entering their user credentials into this script, which is then just playing the game. So it just plays the game the whole time. It may not play at high frequency, doesn't need to, just keeps playing it, and then eventually they will hit, get to the top of the leaderboard, get, in-app, instead of having to do in-app purchases, get those benefits for free, etc. So this is something we've seen a lot. We have customers who we're protecting their mobile games from this kind of thing. This guy wouldn't do API abusing, would he? He looks like a very happy business guy. This is an example where he's doing API abusing, but maybe doesn't even realize he's doing it. A slightly more complex example. This is a car sharing application that's actually an aggregator application. So on the left-hand side, we have a car. Think of it as car rental, car sharing, whichever one you like. This is, again, it's a real customer example. Then we have an aggregator app. So the aggregator app is not the same company. It's a different company. It's been set up, and what they do is they pull in all the information about the transport options within a given city. So they will show you car rental, car sharing, trains, buses, scooters, whatever's available, which is great for the consumer. You look at that and you go, oh, I've got all these different choices. But how they're probably doing it is by scraping the APIs of all those providers. And in some cases, the providers are not very happy about this. So in this example, you see people using proxies to hide who they actually are, accessing backend directly, but they're using the user credentials. So again, the happy guy, here is entering his user credentials. Okay, so he is complicit in the process, and he enters his user credentials into the aggregator app. The aggregator app uses those credentials then to scrape the APIs of the providers. Now, you might say, well, the aggregator is providing a service, so they're providing more eyeballs and people to the providers of the rental car service or whatever it is. Yeah, maybe, but the point is that they are, the customer journey is changing, so no longer does the provider, the car rental provider, have control over the customer because it's a third-party app they're using. So they might be motivated to go and use other providers. But it's actually worse in this case because the app, or rather the API, can be used to open the car. Okay, so in this case, the app on the left-hand side, if it has proper credentials, when the API will allow the car to be opened when those user credentials are close to the physical car. And that, as it turns out, in this example, could all be done through the API. So the aggregator app could actually be used to open the car. So that is a huge security risk as well. So just wanted to show you a range of different API abuse use cases, because I think it's really important that you think about how people can game the system. Because the fact of the matter is, if there's a way to do it, people will do it. And they may be just enthusiastic, or they may be just looking for a better user experience, but they're complicit in abusing your API. And that's something that you should think about, because it will have an impact on your business sooner or later. Take the aggregator example. There's plenty of cases where aggregators have started off free, giving access to more eyeballs, but of course, once they reach critical mass, then they start to charge. So aggregators can be a challenge too. So think about how your systems, the APIs you're producing, could be gamed, and think about what you need to do to prevent that happening. And don't think you're too small and nobody will do it, because somebody will do it. And they will do it in a low-frequency way using correct credentials and correct methods, which means you may not even know it's going on until it starts to have an impact on your business. So hopefully that was useful. Thank you very much for your time. Continue to enjoy APIs, and well, we're going to have questions, I think, later on. Be happy to answer your questions then if you have any. Thank you.